Welcome back to the Obvious Choice podcast. You know, it is very, very rare that I come across somebody with a minute that I come across this person or this person's platform, I immediately say, holy shit, I need to subscribe to their email list and I need to get to know them somehow because this person is so clearly for me in every weird way. And John, you were that person, man. There's a quote I want to start with, and then I want you to riff off of that because I want to get back to how the books and biceps thing started.
Okay.
You said, this is from, I think, a feature in the New Yorker on you. Maybe. I looked at a whole bunch of sources. But you said, the overlap of dudes who lift and also read a ton is like the most underserved market.
Yes, it is
Tell
most
me more.
underserved. It's the most underserved market out there because the dudes who lift and the dudes who read are typically, I'll say, high achievers. They're typically guys who aren't just sitting on the couch binging. They're usually, I'm going to say, either married or in relationships. They have kids. They're striving to learn. They're striving to improve their bodies. They're striving to improve their minds. They usually have healthy hobbies. Reading is about as healthy a hobby as you can get. And a lot of times, even if you're just reading for pleasure, your biographies, fiction, sci-fi, it doesn't matter. But you also read towards interests. Maybe you're reading about starting a business. Maybe you're reading about some emotions you're having, or even if you're reading about you're into architecture or music and you're reading about music. So it's really a conduit to a whole host of this giant demographic of guys that. Listen, this is my Macho Man book, which we'll talk about. My 10th book. Yeah. I've been in the trenches here. I've written for every men's fitness magazine around. When it comes to giant publishing and media, it's somehow just ignored most of the time.
Isn't that wild? The cerebral aspect of training, I think, for people who stick with it over a long period of time.
Yeah.
That to me is what jumps out. I mean, I don't know about you. I could speak for myself. I started lifting because I thought that it would make me more attractive to girls. Like, straight up. Probably not quite true, maybe true. I don't really know, but that's certainly enough to get, I don't know, a young dude started, but probably not enough to keep him going for 20 or 30 or 40
years. Well, it looks, first of all, like, it looks, being jacked is awesome. Like if you grew up watching, whatever, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you grew up watching action movies, I grew up in the 80s, so we're talking Stallone and Schwarzenegger and Wesley Snipes, and these guys were huge and they were larger than life, and they were the kind of physiques you would aspire to. I watched, wrestling was huge for me. Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man. These guys were all big, giant, muscular guys. And then if you're into, especially in the U.S., if you're into mainstream sports, if you watch football, if you watch basketball, even baseball to a certain extent, boxing. I grew up watching Mike Tyson. You grew up watching your favorite NFL guys. The theme is being jacked sort of helps in almost all physical endeavors. So I started lifting as soon as I could because I first was a swimmer, and that was part of our cardio and routine was pretty decent amount of lifting. Surprisingly, we were a little ahead of the curve. I think my coach was back then. And then I started playing football in high school, and that's like rite of passage. You start playing football and you're doing your benchathon and you're doing your squats and your deadlifts and all the main lifts. And I've never looked back, and I've never, it's like, why would you not be stronger? I get that there's things you can compete in where, I run marathons, so I don't want to be 240. I know the whole hybrid athlete thing, which is really cool and awesome and something I'm even into. But like, I get that there's certain things if you're into, cyclists don't want to be all upper body and weight. You're carrying that weight around the track or whatever.
Sure.
But overall, being fit is far better than not being fit. To me, there's not even a question,
There's not even a question. And you brought up an interesting point there where you talked about the difference in sports. So I grew up in Canada, and of course, hockey was a big thing. Growing up in Toronto, we have every sport, but hockey's a big thing. And I wonder, and also baseball. So like the Toronto Blue Jays, I don't know if you followed them this year, but there's a big joke that their catering bill is going to be the most expensive ever for any team because they've got like all of the big heavy dudes.
Yeah, they got jack guys this year.
They got, well, I don't know about jack guys, but big guys. But I wonder how much the specific sports you grow up watching impacted, away from the action movies and stuff, which of course do. But you think about a sport like hockey, even if the dude is jacked, you don't see it.
Yeah.
As opposed to, football you might, but basketball to an extent. Mm-hmm. And the marketability of the sports certainly is impacted. Like sports where the players wear a helmet covering their face versus sports where they don't. Mm-hmm. there's a massive difference in promotional dollars in
Mm-hmm.
those sports. What do you read when you're not researching for a book that you're writing? What do you like to read?
I love. I like biographies a lot, and then there's no
Mm,
genre in particular. I like historical nonfiction books. Mostly, those are probably my favorites. Books
okay.
about crazy survival stories. I always like, or anything. This woman Candace Millard, one of my favorite authors. She did
Ha!
Teddy Roosevelt,
I
River of Doubt. Did you heard of that
bro,
one?
I read that like not even a month ago because
She's incredible. If I
she's
could buy
incredible.
just like a lifetime pass of just here's my money. As soon as your book comes out, I don't even know the topic. Just send it to me.
Yeah.
I would read all of her stuff. Her Winston Churchill
So
book is
I
amazing.
had no idea about her or anything about it.
Yes.
Like I said, I'm living in Mexico,
Yeah.
and there's a little library in the next town over called San Pancho, and it's slim pickings here, straight
Sure.
up. And so I just go to that library and I'll just pick 3 or 4 books off of the shelf, whatever
Mhm.
looks interesting. I have no idea about any of them, but how do you
Yeah.
pick, especially fiction? I read a lot of fiction. How do you pick fiction when you don't know the author?
Yeah.
You just read the first 5-10 pages, and I picked up River of Doubt.
Yeah.
It was phenomenal.
Phenomenal. Her books are all great. There's so many books where my system is like authors kind of earn like if I like one or two of their books, I'll kind of just get the next one on faith, even if the topic isn't
Mm,
totally up to me. There's a woman named Susan Casey who writes these books all about the ocean. She's written books on the great white sharks off of San Francisco, books on the
cool.
dolphins and like learning and how smart dolphins are. She has a new one about the abyss called the Underworld, which is about, and she's actually the plug her thing, but she's about to go like I think in the Mariana Trench in one of those like little submersibles. She's her follow on Instagram. It's really cool. But her last
Wow.
book was about exploring the deep sea and like what we can learn about Earth and our psychology and all these things. And so just water stuff always fascinates me. I always joke that I
Mm.
have like the largest swimming book collection ever because nobody there's more books than you think on swimming and swimmers, and I probably have them all. But
Yeah.
I veer towards those, and then I really do try, and I've tried harder and harder, and I say try not in the sense of like it's difficult, but I make a conscious effort to read more fiction than I would. I
Yes.
love Elmore Leonard books. I love detective. I love the great dialogue in some of his books. I love Stephen King. Actually, I
I
try to
gotta
read
get
one of
into
his
his
books.
books.
I never
Okay.
could for years and years, and but I don't enjoy most of his earlier stuff.
Mm.
But every year I try to grab something that like I just
Right.
know of his was a little bit different, not like Cujo or one of those very early
What do,
ones, but
what
one
do
of
I
the
start with? What do I start with of his?
there's a book called Under the Dome. It's
Okay.
huge.
That's
It's
fine.
really, really big.
That's fine.
That one is really, really good. And like Lizzy's story is very much like it's almost like like an overarching sci-fi romance slash mystery that like it was one of those 600-page things that as a writer I'm like, how do you write all
Oh
of
my
this?
god.
And then all of a sudden I'm 200 pages in and it's 1 a.m. and I'm like, this guy just knows what he's doing. And so those are two of them. And again, those aren't two like, Misery or one of these where everybody just
Mm.
hears it and all those kind of things. I'll read almost any of those books that Don Winslow has a series that's almost wrapping up right now. It's like his retirement book. But it's like a 3-part like Godfather type trilogy about this
Oh,
one
cool.
character. That's awesome. So I really try to do that. And especially because of the newsletter that I write, Books and Biceps, I have a lot of author friends now who do these books. And so
Yeah.
they'll tell me I'm working on this, I'm working on that. And I get a little bit of a heads up. So I do have a little bit of an in over 15 or 20 years of doing all this stuff. But
Right.
a lot of it too, I do make a lot of space for just like you did with the library, cruising Barnes and Noble, and like this cover looks amazing. I did that. There's a book called Whale Fall. It's
Okay.
one of the most incredible books I've ever read about a real life. What would happen if a scuba diver, gets swallowed by a sperm whale off the coast of California? And it's all
Huh.
scientifically possible and doable. He spent years studying whales, talking to whatever the marine biologists who study whales, talking to scuba experts, and it was like this is how it would go. And if you knew had that knowledge to do it,
Yeah.
here's how you would survive. And it's like a ticking
Wild.
clock inside of a freaking whale book, and it's brilliant. And I bought it because the cover was amazing.
I mean, that sounds like The Martian, too, right? Just
Exactly.
somebody who's
It's
just that much of
literally
a
the Martian
geek.
inside a whale. Yeah.
Well, I want to take it back a step because I think what you're describing here that's really, really cool is if you're really fascinated about something, and this is what fascinates me about you the minute that I came across your thing, is you appreciate the art surrounding it, but also you dabble. And you
I
dabble
do
in all
dabble.
different areas of it. I tell people I write nonfiction. I'm the book that I'm coming out with in January of next year. It's my first conventionally published book,
Mhm.
but it'll be my 12th. And I did a textbook, I did a children's book with my wife,
Nice.
just all over the place, right? I've had ghostwriters writing in my name, and then I like to write myself now. But what I tell people, and they're always surprised, is I read about 90% fiction to nonfiction. And people are often surprised when I say that. And even the nonfiction that I write is almost never related. Like, the book that I'm coming out with is a business book. But I don't really read business books anymore because you kind of get to the point where you have the foundations, and books for one topic are often kind of 101 level foundational stuff because they have to. I'm like, I start reading a book about behavioral psychology or the cognitive biases or whatever, and I'm just like, I know exactly what study you're going to use.
Mhm.
Like, I've just read so much on this subject.
Yeah.
And so you're starting to try to look at this and find stories to exemplify this thing in perhaps different ways. And I think dabbling is the key to that. So biographies for sure on,
Yeah, I like.
things like The River of Doubt. But
Yeah,
fiction, man, like fiction is how
yeah.
you tell a great story.
Fiction is amazing. There's Project Hail Mary. I don't know if you read
So
that
good.
one,
So
right?
good.
And so you mentioned The Martian. That's why I thought of it.
Yeah, and
That book
his
is
one in
it's
the middle, his Artemis was a
yeah.
maybe
The
not so
moon
hot,
one
but
was a little bit out there. I don't, I wondered why that one wasn't. I think it's because he created such an interesting world that had like more of like a economy and society where like you had to actually buy in a little bit deeper because
yeah,
it had to make sense. But anyway, not to get into that. It's still it's still the energy and effort and research
yeah.
put into even Artemis was incredible.
But Project Hail
But
Mary
Project
was
Hail Mary,
phenomenal.
it's fiction, it's science fiction. It's about as
Hmm.
far out of science fiction you can get, but it is all about humanity and
Yes.
self and ego and sacrifice. And you could write a book, a nonfiction book on humanity, ego, self, and sacrifice, and it would be garbage if you wrote it the way that. But when you're reading this and you're following the main character, you're following what's happening on Earth, you're following,
Mm.
you can see it kind of come together. And so I agree with you. That's why I really make a con, because I could easily be like, okay, I'm really, something will come up and it's like, wow, I'm really reading about, generals right now. So I haven't read about Napoleon or Genghis Khan. I'm going to read
Right.
a bunch of these and I'll find myself 3 or 4 deep of just random historical figures. And then I honestly do say like, okay, we're going to get back to like, and I've lately, so I didn't read a sci-fi book till I was probably 40.
Mm.
I just didn't, I wasn't into it. And all of a sudden you'll read like an Isaac Asimov book or The Martian when it first came out. And it does take, that's why I don't understand people who kind of knock like the pop culture, the pop zeitgeist. Like
Oh, I don't think there's anything
the
wrong with that.
the reason The Martian became huge is because it reached so many people and it was so good.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. And so when that kind of came around, I was like, I might enjoy this, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
kind of get more. And Under the Dome is very much like that, where it answers all these questions about like society and humanity. And I just finished a book recently called 1 Second After, and it's about
Okay.
the book starts right after an EMP attack on the U.S. And
Okay.
it has not left my brain. Like, what happens if we basically go to the Stone Age now? Me and you were talking.
Yeah.
This goes out for a couple days. It's like, well, what is power? Like, do we have power? Like, then nothing. Like, if you're in your car somewhere, you're done. All the planes in the sky gone. And
Yeah.
wherever you are, you are. And now you got to figure out life
What
moving forward.
happens?
It's
Oh,
it's
wow.
brilliant, and
Wow.
it's fiction. And if you wrote a study on it, I wouldn't read it; it'd be boring. But it's about a
Well,
dad trying to keep his family alive, and it's
and you
awesome.
wonder, well, it's kind of like Cormac McCarthy, right? It's kind of like The Road or whatever.
Yeah,
But and I mean, same type of thing. You don't even know what happened, but you can just tell that the author wanted to explore this idea,
yep.
and the story was a very easy way, or probably not an easy way, but a way to get into explore the idea that
Like
was
very effective. Yeah.
effective and somewhat academic. I
Mhm.
think in a lot of cases, what you're talking about, you talked about Asimov, like very academic. I mean, you read the Foundations, just like, Jesus, man.
Well,
Or
these
the
guys are all
Foundation
smart. They're
series.
all smart people. I mean, all the authors
Yeah,
we mentioned, like Candace Millard, Susan Kate, like
they
these are
have to be.
brilliant people who can take, especially as someone who writes books, you write books. These are
Mm.
people who can take millions of pieces of a puzzle in their brain and condense it into a coherent 200, 300, 400 page book that
Yeah.
moves. Like, I'm not saying like we're so awesome because we're authors, but it's really hard. It's really, really hard to do. Like, the more I see some of these books, like I know the work that goes into a biography
Yes.
of someone like Macho Man, right? But like Teddy Roosevelt, I mean, this is, now you're talking on a world stage with a zillion, I know the exponential power of the larger the life that the person had. And so when some of these come out, you can only just stand there like maybe an architect stands at a skyscraper in awe.
So how do you get over that? So that's a question for me. Like I can read, because I've written so much nonfiction. I've written so much on the web as well. I mean, I've written over 15 million words that I've published on the web since 2011. So like I've written a lot of nonfiction. But I'm also fascinated by fiction. And I read nonfiction, and even the best nonfiction, I admire the hell out of it. But I also kind of look at it now and I think, y'all, I'm going to get there. I'm not saying that I'm there yet, but I'm going to work my ass off and I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
I read phenomenal fiction and I'm just amazed to the point where I don't understand. Like, I read The Three Body Problem and I'm just like, how did this come out of a human brain? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And great fiction and great storytelling. I mean, you think about like Neil Stephenson stuff, right? Or a lot of this kind of steampunk like sci-fi stuff. It's just so out there. But it's a cohesive story that comes together. How do you get over that with biography? Because you did Mean Joe Green, right? You're just coming out with a book on the Macho Man, Randy Savage, which is great. How do you get over that? Almost standing on the shoulders of greatness of these Candace Millards and say, I can do this too.
I think it's reps like anything else. I started at magazines. So I started, it wasn't like I woke up one day and cracked my knuckles and was like, let me write a 100,000 word book on some amazing human, right? Like that's not how it works. Like I spent most of my 20s writing for Men's Fitness and Muscle and Fitness, GQ, Men's Health. So I worked my way from just, went back when everybody was reading magazines, you'd have front of the book stuff, 200 word features, 500 word features, little Q&As, all the way to by my mid 20s, I was doing the cover stories for these magazines. I was going
to say, were you doing the profiles and the cover
stories?
So
I did the big profile. So I was actually really young. I was 24. I got my first big giant cover story on Tiki Barber or the New York Giants for Men's Fitness. And I actually did the next, I want to say it was 9 or 10 in a row. Like I just got in a groove. I did.
What year was this about?
This was 2003 and 4. So I just graduated school and I started writing for like local newspapers. The web was still pretty young as far as like, there weren't really sites to write for. Nobody knew how to pay people for that stuff.
Yeah.
So I started working on them, but I was writing for local newspaper. I moved to California. I was writing for the Santa Monica Sun, the Pacific Palisades Press, like, a penny, literally a penny a word. I was working for Comedy Central at the time, so I was.
Yeah, you worked for the Man Show, right?
I worked for the Man Show. I worked for.
That was the original. I mean, that was the OG.
First, yeah.
Was that Jimmy Kimmel? Who was
Jimmy
that?
Kimmel and Corolla. Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
that was their first real.
Jimmy was on a show called Ben Stein's Money before that. It was like a talk. It was like a Q&A show. But yeah,
I remember that show.
Remember that? It was actually really good. It was like a Jeopardy for like funny people. I loved it.
It was.
And yeah, so I worked on right out of school. That was my first. My first job was on the set of. I was building like. I was a strong guy, so they're like, "Oh, you can go build desks." I was literally unloading trucks and building the set for all these places. And one of the offices I was building, literally, when I say building an office, I mean like there's a big empty room and there's boxes, and it's like, okay, we need 3 desks, we need shelves, and it was Jimmy and Adam's office, and they would come in early because they were before the season started to like just start their production and all that. And I had a Red Sox hat on. We were talking sports. They're regular guys. And eventually when I finished their office, I was like, can I work on just your show instead of like, if I'm going to build something, I'd rather build something for the Man Show than just whatever. And they were like, yeah, okay. And so I was a PA for them. And, that involved sitting in the writer's room and getting lunch. And I was right out of school.
Wow. To have that exposure.
But it was great.
Was that the show where the end credits was just women jumping on trampolines?
Yeah.
That was that one, right? Oh my God.
My favorite, the most jealous day any of my friends ever had, because I graduated school and most of my friends either went to like Philadelphia or New York City or DC to work in finance or business or marketing. And I called them all one day and I was like, I know you guys just took the train in and you're living 7 of you in a crappy apartment somewhere. But my job today is standing outside of the trampolines to make sure none of the girls in bikinis fall off. This is all I'm doing for the next 8 hours is standing here watching girls in bikinis jump around. And that was my day. That was one day, but it was when you're 23, that's about as good of a day as you're going
That's
to have
about
on
as
the
good as a
job.
day. God, can you imagine if they were to do that now? But you were able to get yourself into the room, even though you weren't. When I originally came across that you worked on there, I assumed that you were in the writers' room,
No,
but you
I was
weren't.
just building stuff. I was literally carrying things and building things. The first set I did was for Mad TV. I had to break it down, which anybody remembers that show. It was the same. It was on this lot called Hollywood Center Studios, and they just, when one show would end, they would take all the stuff out, and then another show would come in for 8 months, and they'd bring it all in. And I was just a worker. I was basically a construction guy. Just through a friend of a friend of a friend got me on the lot, and he was like, "Just keep your ears open, and if you want to write whatever you want to do, just make sure that if you meet someone who's a writer, just talk them up." And so I was doing that. It just happened that I was building. They weren't the first guys I had talked to. There was a show called The XTV or something with Andrew Dice Clay, which was on the set at the same time. Okay. Anyway, a bunch of shows were there, and
it was kind of the golden era of that type of TV.
It was weird,
like the MTV
a lot of sketch
stuff.
comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so I just happened to get on that show. And again, it's not like I sat with them every day or did anything. I built the writers' room after that, moving desks, moving everything, and I hung out with those guys. And then I really realized when I submitted some skits and some one or two lines would occasionally get on. I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Sure.
But I realized I really wanted to write under my own name, and so that's when I started pitching, the local newspapers, and I had ideas for fitness. I've worked out my whole life. I subscribed to Men's Health and Men's Fitness. I was like 16, and they were both, and Men's Fitness and Muscle and Fitness were in Woodland Hills out there. So I started hitting up the editor there. This is so not so long ago, but so weirdly tech long ago that it was actually printing up my query letter and sending it by real mail.
Right.
This was 2001.
Yeah. Was that wasn't Lou, was it?
No, it was a guy named Jerry Candela was the editor-in-chief of Men's Fitness back then.
The editor-in-chief, yeah.
Yeah.
No, Lou was never the editor-in-chief there, but he was the fitness editor for a number of years.
Yeah, so that's how I started. That's how I started with that, and then. Okay. What's amazing is I stayed in touch with Sal, who was on the show, and this guy Dave Damashek, who was a writer on the show back then, and now was a big football writer, football podcaster for the NFL Network. I've stayed in touch with them, and funny enough, both Sal and Dave, they endorsed my Macho Man book. So this is 24 years ago. I'm sitting there building a desk while they're not married, or they're maybe 4 years older than me, 5 years older than me. And now here we are, you just stay in touch with people and it comes full circle, and they're doing huge things on big networks and I'm doing what I can do. And it was very gratifying to see them hey, get our buddy's book. And I'm like, I met these guys. I was a kid, cool.
But this is where I want to take this, because what I love about what it seems like is kind of the whole message throughout your entire career is actually the title of the first chapter in the second half of my book called The Obvious Choice. It's coming out. Same title of the podcast. It's coming out next year. Is Let Your Geek Flag Fly. And even back then, you were like, well, I kind of like this writing thing. I kind of like this TV thing. It's interesting. I don't know where it's going. But I'm also a strong guy. So how can I get myself, even if you weren't thinking about this is what you did naturally. Mm-hmm. How can I get myself into a room where this is happening? Well, they're not going to invite me into the writer's room unless I can build desks and move shit.
Yeah, exactly.
And even now what you're doing, where your newsletter, Books and Biceps. So you started with the Finkel 5.
Yeah.
What was it? The Finkel Fast 5.
Finkel's Fast 5, yeah. The ill-fated Finkel's Fast 5. I got great advice on that. I wish I remember who it was, because it was just someone on Twitter wrote, and it clicked it off for me, and they were like, "Who the hell's Finkel?" And I was like, God damn, that's brilliant. Why would anybody sign up for this? They don't have, I started with 15 family members and friends, and it grew to maybe 200 or something. But it was such a moment where I was like, that is such a brilliant cut down. Cause I was like, why the hell would you sign up? I started as a ripoff of Tim Ferriss's 5 Bullet Friday.
Sure.
But Tim Ferriss had 4 million YouTube downloads, podcast, instantly, Tim Ferriss is 5, I'll get it.
Yeah.
And when someone wrote, "Who the hell is Finkel?" It light bulbs went off, and I was like, all right, I need to think about what I'm doing with this, what it is, who it's for, so that if someone who's never heard of me and has no idea who I am or what I do sees the name, I've done 1 million headlines for newspapers, for magazines. I got what a headline matters. And on the biggest thing I was working on, I'm like, oh, Finkel's Fast 5, so cool.
Yeah. Oh my God, look, it alliterates, guys.
It alliterates. Hey. It's 3 things. It's brilliant. And so after whatever many issues it was, I rebranded it. But it was a big lesson to learn. Sometimes when someone rips on you or makes a critique, I've really tried hard over my life to not have the knee jerk, well, F you. I was a dead on,
You could have still said that. You could have just said F you, but
yeah, I could have, and then I'd still be writing a Finkel's Fast 5, and instead of whatever 13,000 or whatever I have, it'd still be 210, because every time someone saw Finkel's Fast 5, they'd think what this person thought, which is, who the hell's Finkel?
You and I wouldn't be talking if it was Finkel's Fast 5, right? So number one, that's fascinating. I mean, the idea there that you brought up, which I think is so big for a lot of people listening to this, is I'm going to copy what somebody else is doing that's successful, not realizing that the reason that they became successful actually has nothing to do with what they're doing now. Like what they can do now is not what got them to the point that enables them to do that thing. Yep. Tim Ferriss doesn't have a whatever million plus person email list because of, what is it, 5 Bullet Friday? Like James Clear does not have a 2 million person or whatever email list because of the 321 newsletter. And I would even go so far as to argue that for somebody who doesn't already have a massive platform and a huge body of work and very successful thought leadership assets, probably a book, but like thought leadership assets, what they're doing and the way that they're doing it is actually objectively bad. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that they're bad, it works for them, but it actually is an objectively bad model to follow. And you see people copying this stuff all the time. And you can pick pieces out of it. For example, like James Clear's emails always have a PS at the end. And the PS is always just some funny joke or something super clever or whatever it is. And I saw that, and my emails have that too. I write a newsletter. Mine is a 5 Reps Friday, which again, not great, but like whatever. I might change the name at some point to maybe Biceps and Books Part 2 or whatever, because your name's great. But I looked at that and I was like, oh, I see what he's doing there. James understands email deliverability. He knows that if he gets the links clicked on in his emails will be delivered at a much higher rate. And they won't go in the promotion tab or whatever it is, because that's a very distinct sign to the email service providers, Gmail, Hotmail, whatever, that the person receiving this email is interested in it if they're clicking a link, and especially if they're clicking a link reliably. Mm-hmm. I was like, that's brilliant. So you can pull pieces out of it. So the same thing. Yeah. My emails have got 73,000 or something like that. My emails have like an 18% click rate. Mm-hmm. And that improves the deliverability. So you can look at what these people are doing. And if you really understand the thing, I think pick out like little bits of it to kind of bring into your thing. And your emails, I bet you have a super high click rate too, just because of the nature of the type of thing that you're recommending. Yeah. So take me back to the inception then of Books and Biceps. Yeah. How did that evolve from? I mean, you told me the impetus, which was somebody basically calling you out on Twitter.
Well, I've probably already done like 30 or 40, and what happened was I was already kind of the idea of interviewing authors or sharing books, and someone who had written about or mentioned shared it, and their bigger following had people underneath it were like, who the hell? What is? Got it. Okay. But the original idea to even start the Finkel's Fast 5 version was twofold. One, as you know, writing books takes a while. So you're kind of a friend of mine, Dart Adams, who's an author, has always said that writing books is like living in the future. It's like I'm starting a book, and I started Macho Man in October of 2022 with the idea that it's going to come out WrestleMania week 2024. Yeah. So I'm writing this book, but you're living through your normal life as a dad, coaching, and as a husband, all the things you do day to day. But in the back of your mind, there's this thing you're working on that no one in the world is going to see for 2 years. Yeah. And so there's a lot of delayed gratification there. And as a writer, as someone who is used to writing for a magazine where every month a cover story would come out, there's the adrenaline rush of flying and doing the stories and doing all this stuff. The idea that I wouldn't get in contact with my audience for 2 years at a time or whatever, or I'd have to rely on, at the time I was still doing some freelance for Men's Fitness, and I was still doing stuff for Yahoo Sports. And so I had contact, but I didn't control that audience. I didn't control the frequency or how they could get in touch with me. And I really wanted to own my connection with my audience. Anyone who understands the value of an email list gets that. And that's probably the number one lesson that I took from the guys you mentioned and others, even Ryan Holiday, who just sends out, here's my book list. You nowadays have the ability with the technology to own your relationship with your audience. Twitter reach has plummeted over who knows how much more now than it was even a year ago.
Yeah.
Facebook organic reach is almost worthless. Unless you're going to pay. It's like I hadn't used it much until I started promoting it for Macho Man, and it's hilarious how little they show your stuff to people.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a direct way to reach your audience, you haven't built it, it makes everything so much harder. And so that was the original idea of just why I would have one. That was like,
Yeah.
why do it? That was my why, was I want to
Just
own my
something in
audience.
between that you enjoy doing, that's
Yeah.
easy to do, that you can just keep some sort of relevance
Yep.
in between these book
And that
projects.
fit within the motion of my life. I've written a zillion
Yeah.
articles like you. I used to be a newspaper, so daily. So I just didn't want something that felt like a chore. I wanted something that I could just enjoy and share. And I
Yeah.
do. I will say, like, because of the kind of books I write for sports fans and fitness fans, I come across a lot of cool stuff, especially when I'm researching. So I wanted to be able to share that in a way where it's like, yeah, it builds up, excitement for whatever book or project, but also these are really fun things that people who are into this stuff will like along the way. And stuff that I find, people that send me things, articles that I like, or other writers. I get interviewed for things the other way too, as a source and things like that. So that's really cool. And then that was the why I would do it. And then the what of like, what am I going to write about? That was actually really simple. It was like, there's two things that I was like, how do you define this? Happened walking my dog. So this is not like, and this is why I will never put like a brainstorm session or a whiteboard session at the top of any list of anything ever. I'd say 90, and I'm sure you'd agree, 95% of every excellent idea I've had has come lifting, swimming, walking my dog, showering, like sitting at the computer trying to urge the muse to happen.
100, dude, say that once more. 100%.
Do not sit, do not, I have a cup of coffee and my notepad open. Brilliant ideas are going to follow. Will never happen. That's almost never happened with anyone ever.
For me, it's mowing the lawn or doing yard work. So
me too.
I built like an office pod outside of our house. And if I'm struggling with something as I'm writing it, I'll get out and I'll just like rake the leaves or I'll mow the lawn or whatever it is.
Yep.
And the amount of times when I've left my lawnmower in the middle of the lawn, because I'm like, that's it. And I just like leave it, sprint back to my computer just to.
That's
just
what I
to
do.
go.
The dog walking is the number one. Just it's so easy. My dogs have a lab, so it's like, let's just go on a 2-mile walk. We live in Florida, so it's always pretty good weather. We live on a big lake, so it's a nice, easy, there's palm trees. It's very relaxing, and I'll either put on some music or nothing, leave my phone at home and just walk. Or swimming. I grew up, like I said earlier, swimming. So like that's a big one for me. You can't listen to music. All you can do is kind of just be in your brain, but you're swimming. I'm doing like a full workout. I'm not just swimming for, a mile. I'll have a full, like I swim on a master's team. So it's like, here's the day's workout, right? And you can't get out till you're done and all that, but your mind is gone. Like you are sensory blocked out from everything. You're not your phone. That's one of my favorite things about swimming is your phone is non-existent.
Yeah.
No headphones. You don't have a Nike Run app following you or tracking anything. You're just doing the workout. But anyway, I was like, okay, what is this? What do I want to call it? If I was trying to have the proverbial like 1 second, what does Finkel write about? I was like, books, obviously, because I'm an author, and fitness. And I had a couple, I can't remember what the other poor names for it, but very quickly in my brain, I was like books and biceps, like books and biceps. And then as soon as, it pops in your head, like obvious choice, like, why keep brainstorming? This is perfect. It's easy. It fits, like you said, it fits in any newsletter header. It's very quick. It's like 10 letters, 12 letters, whatever it is, with an ampersand. Put a little bicep in front of it. I was in my head, I'm like, I can build this, and it's instant. If someone says, "Do you read books and biceps?" You don't even have to say what is it. It's it's books and biceps.
You want it. You want it. I mean, obvious choice. We came up with that on this show.
Nice.
In fact, I'm looking at the top of like Riverside right now, and it literally still says The Goodman Show.
Oh, that's funny.
Because my process often of figuring out things is just to talk in circles with it with really, really smart people.
Yeah,
and
that is good.
We have really 3 types of episodes in the show, but 2 main types of episodes in the show. One is interview, which we're starting to do more and more and more because the show was actually created to workshop the book.
Okay.
And now that the book is done, the manuscript is officially accepted by the publisher. Now I'm in that like 8-month waiting period as HarperCollins like ships it out to whoever.
Isn't that the hardest part? Like when you can do your own stuff and then you're like, oh, so I'm in no control of this timeline now. I can't just do anything.
And I don't really know what to do. I'm actually going to call my agent and just be like,
just start your next book. My advice is to start the next book.
Is that what I should do?
Just start the next book because what I've learned is if you wait to start your next book till after the one comes out, you actually just lose a year plus. Like I like to have a big thing coming out every year, maybe 18 months at the most, just because momentum. And so that's
get into that cycle.
Yeah. Cause you do have months. I mean, I wrapped the manuscript for Macho in I think it was like maybe September or even earlier of last year, like right in the middle of the
Yeah.
summer, August. And
Yeah.
then, you have a month or two till the first proof and edits come in. Then you do go through it again when you've had a little break. And then
Yeah.
after that and the layout, yeah, you could have 6 months of literally like twiddling your
Yeah.
thumbs on that project. You're looking at covers and you're doing all the promo that we do because we know what we're doing. But as far as literally sitting down writing and working on a project,
It's not
I've learned
much.
over the years, just as soon as one's in, like even if all you're doing is researching, you're
Yeah,
not writing yet.
that's kind of what I'm doing. I mean, so the you know I submitted chapter by chapter by chapter, got edits back, submitted the full thing once. The editor did a full once over, and then the manuscript went in like a week and a half ago, and officially got approved, and everything's good. And but from when I submitted the first manuscript, when the bulk was done, I mean, you're talking like 10 months.
Oh yeah, their
And
print timeline is, and it's a look. I actually get it from having done it for a
oh, I
long
get
time,
it.
like paper, shipping, delivery, printing press. Like I understand why they do what the way they
Yeah.
do. So this isn't knocking how traditional publishing works. It's just a long ass
It's
timeline.
different. Well, and it's different because I self-published for
Yep.
so long.
Yeah.
I created like a little box set of books, and when I was done it, we had our own interior designer and
Yeah.
called my printers, and we already had fulfillment set up. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to do a first print run of 2,000 copies. Sent an email, sold that in 10 hours. Great. Okay, we're going to do an next print run of 5,000 copies, and just like flipped it like that.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas now it's very much in the future. So that's your advice. You've given me a few unlocks here, actually,
Yeah.
which I'll tell you about afterwards, which has been
Okay.
really helpful. But that idea of waiting and waiting and waiting is hard, man.
It's hard. And then what's even funnier, and I'm in the thick of it with Macho Man, is when it comes
Yeah.
out, you're like, you almost have to re-engage with the
Yes.
project
That's what I've
because
been worried about.
that's the
Because I'm going to
hard
be engaged in another project.
right. So
And then
what
I'm going to have to be like, oh shit, what did I write about? I can't talk about
I
this.
admit freely, you are, the time that would be amazing to do all the interviews and PR for a book are towards the tail end of writing it, because you
Yeah.
are neck deep in everything. You remember everything. You're in it all day, every day. You're writing for 6 hours a day, plus doing the interviews and all the things you're doing. Then you don't do the interviews. Then now, I mean, a year ago, I was like prime. So I
Yeah.
actually, and I do this, I've done this for every book, and it sounds, my memory is not the greatest with a lot of things. Yeah, I reread my book because I
Yep.
hadn't read it in 8 months. And obviously,
Sure.
I can skip through. I'm familiar with, I'm not like from scratch. I get it. But I kind of flip through the whole thing. I grab my big accordion file of all my notes and kind of flip through, because I've done over 100 interviews for this book in the last 3 weeks. And you want to make sure that you're up to speed on everything, because I've been working on something totally different for 4 months.
Right.
And my biggest fear, I always joke with these, is like, we're talking about Macho, and some of the mainstream local radio shows or bigger sports podcasts that I've done will, towards the end, they'll throw a curveball and start talking about, Mean Joe or Charlie Ward or my book 996. And it's like my brain is like truck brakes, like, okay, hold on. I wrote that 7 years ago. That's another 100,000 word project. Like, give me a minute. Like, I gotta figure this out. I gotta shift my brain. And usually it's high level stuff, but every now and then someone will bring up a specific thing that I talked about because they just read it. Oh, I read this and saw you had it, and I just read your Charlie Ward book. And I'll be like, oh my God, dude, like, that's
especially
like
because
you
it's
mentioned.
not your story. You're telling other people's stories.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of those fascinating things that it's like, if your brain is truly has a max capacity, it's like you pull. I do feel like I somehow mentally like, okay, we've wiped this space clean for now to write this
Yeah.
book. I don't have all that stuff at the ready right here,
Right.
because it was like you just said, it's 800,000 words ago and 5 years ago.
800,000 polished words.
Published words, which is
Right.
whatever 1.5 million
God.
draft words or whatever it would be.
I've started to create like I don't even have this name for it, but basically like a darling file, the Stephen King thing, like kill your
Yeah.
darlings. I'm like, I'm okay killing my darlings,
Yeah.
but I need to put them somewhere, thinking that I'm going to use them,
Yeah,
knowing
yeah.
that I won't.
Yep.
But I'm just not okay with completely deleting them. I need to at least put them somewhere.
Yeah, let them sit, and then one day, every now and then, I will have something where I'll be like, God, I wrote part of this thing, or this article didn't get published, and it's like a perfect time. And sometimes it'll appear in like a book, Books and Biceps as like a column or something.
Got it.
But every now and then I'll be writing a chapter, and my books have every now and then they'll dovetail nicely where I'll have research from something else that can work into a new project. And it's a happy accident when it does, but it's not often.
So what are you doing ongoing in between the books? I mean, obviously the books are coming out. You're on this big media thing for the Macho Man book, which seems to be going really, really well. You said 100 interviews. That's obviously going to, sell the Macho Man book, which is great. Give that the launch pad, but then it's going to help improve your platform.
It helps the advance for the next
that.
project. Yeah, the advance for the next project, which is what writers work on. Opportunities for other books. So I ghostwrite books in between with athletes and CEOs and military people, whoever comes around. I do 1 or 2 of those a year. Those are, as you probably know, pretty lucrative projects to do. And the higher the visibility you do for your books like this, that's where you're more sought after as a co-author or something like that. So that's how you kind of fill in the blanks. And those are they're kind of like background projects. I find ghostwriting, especially like in an autobiography type setting, it's pretty, I won't say easy in terms of like level of difficulty, but it's efficient. You kind of, once you get the person's voice down and you have a nice cadence of talking a couple times a week, you can really knock those out, and not in a rushing way at all, but in like a more of a 6 to 8 month span, as opposed to like the 1.5 to 2 year writing like a full biography would be.
Yeah, you don't need to chase after the source.
It's one person, they have final approval. You're trying to just get their story out. And you talk like Mean Joe Green, you mentioned, that was an autobiography. So it was he and I was a co-author of that book.
Okay.
And I listened when I lived in Texas. There was that book that came out, Tuesdays with Maury. I had Tuesdays with Mean Joe. Every Tuesday, I went to his house at like 2:00 till 4:00, and we talked. And he lived about 15 minutes away from me in Texas, right outside of Dallas.
And you just had a voice recorder or something?
I had a voice recorder. It was, he was, big, giant, Mean Joe Green, but like the nicest dude. He had his Hall of Fame bust in his family room. We'd sit down in his living room.
That's cool.
I'd put my recorder out. I had my sources, and I was interviewing people for that because just other Steelers players, for anyone who's an NFL fan, other people who were his rivals. So I was asking him about what they were saying. But for about 3 to 4 months, every Tuesday we sat down for 2 hours, 2 to 4. We'd have some iced tea and just roll through his life and career. And then I wrote it as we were going. I kind of wrote it on the fly and then expanded that, and that was the process for that book.
And I wonder how much that changes depending on who you're working with. I don't know much about that world at all, but I spoke to Mark Manson a fair bit about his, he did Will Smith's book.
Yeah, that was I heard a couple interviews with him, and that was like a full-on immersive.
It was like full-on immersive for very short, intense periods of time.
Yeah.
It was not the every Tuesday. It was like, come travel with me for a week, and we're going to, hang out at night.
That's one way to do it.
Go,
I did. So I did Nate Robinson for NBA fans. He was a 3-time NBA dunk champion. He
at 5'4". He's my hero.
Yeah.
He was 5'8". Okay. He's too tall for me. All right.
Oh, okay. Well, he was awesome. He was the first book I did, was his autobiography. It was endorsed by Spike Lee and Jeff Van Gundy and a lot of NBA players that people know. But that's what I did with his book. So we had done a bunch of interviews, and then when the NBA season ended, this is back in like 2013, 14, when he was still in the league, I flew to Seattle and spent a week just with him, just his family, his life, just getting everything down every day.
So you hadn't spoken to him?
No, we'd spoken for maybe an hour or two a week for about a month or so. But I knew I was going to spend a week with him, just staying with him. And so it wasn't a full week. It was probably like 4 days or something. But I flew up, and it was wall to wall. We did interviews over breakfast. We would go, he had to do, run errands, and it was just more getting to feel his voice and his tone.
Yeah.
And I got to see, he still lives in his hometown in Mount Rainier in Washington, or Rainier, Washington. So we would go, and like I saw his high school, and all the places I'm writing about, he took me. And so that was super helpful and awesome. And I had a great frame of reference moving forward after that to finish his book. So I've done both versions of that. I think they could both work. Mean Joe's, I guess, because his whole career was kind of behind him and he was a little older. It wasn't really probably a version of that, but I think that in-person time is very helpful one way or the other, whether it's in a chunk for a week, like Manson. I know I was reading he had a ton of those, like you said, 3 or 4 different times, like come with me for 10 days. Yeah.
And he didn't even know when they were going to happen.
Yeah.
Will's assistant literally called him and was like, "Yo, there's a jet waiting for you. Pack your bag."
Yeah, so
Like,
that
it
with a
was,
wife and with a wife and kids and coaching, that's not my style. I don't think
yeah.
I coach my kids' teams, and I don't think I can just pack up for 10 days. But yeah, so I've done a lot of those, and those are sort of my. I won't even call them in between projects because they're equally important. They're just not under directly my name. And then I do a lot of creative consulting for a lot of the fitness brands and fitness things that I've worked for
Okay.
in the past.
So what are you doing in between the books? This is always the big sticky point with me, and I know a lot of people listening to this as well, is I get, okay, every 2 years or whatever, you're going to come out with, call it like a lightning strike, like something
Mhm.
big that's going to be under your name, and you want to have an audience or a platform for that thing for when it comes out
Yeah.
to give it the life it needs. And then if it's good, it's going to go off and do its thing in the world. But in between those moments, are you actively really trying to build the audience, or are you relying on, call it that, like lightning strike period to build the
Yeah.
audience, and then it's almost steady state? You're sending your newsletter, it's good, you're not stressing about the build until that next leap up. How do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Well, it's a really important time for you to be asking me that because as I've led up to Macho Man and gone through, and as I use Beehive as an email platform, and as
Sure.
these platforms have become, whatever one you use, they become so much more intuitive and easy to monetize. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I've started to realize that instead of some of the projects that I take on, for financial reasons or because, you want to keep working throughout in between the larger paydays and the larger books. I actually now have a really big asset. Books and
Yeah.
Biceps is a completely untapped asset. I've watched what you've been doing. I've, since we've connected, and I've kind of
Mm-hmm.
checked out your platform and all the ways you monetize and the things that you do. Obviously, I was so stupid early on. Like I'd read, like we mentioned, Tim Ferriss, and I'd be like, oh, he must just like athletic greens, not realizing like
Yeah.
he's probably making 10 grand to send from sponsorships and
More.
affiliates.
More.
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably 50 grand, whatever it is. But I had not, thought of all the reasons I said the what and the why earlier were exactly true. And over the
Mm.
last 3 or 4 months, I've really come around to the idea that I'm going to be moving into that being the main source of revenue, even more so probably than
Oh,
books over
cool.
time as I grow, because I have right now it's been free. I have never had a sponsor. I've never had an affiliate really, other than for books, a couple things. There's no paid version where there's a community or anything. I haven't done any of the things that I see all the
Mm.
smart people like you doing, because I write books.
Yeah.
And now I've talked to so many people doing this, and really done the research and have the time, because I really was Macho Man and 2 or 3 other books I were working on were all kind of heading at the same time. And I
Right.
realized that I think I'm sitting on something that's the most valuable thing I could have, which is the owned audience and community of Books
It's
and Biceps.
you are. It's funny. So I think about this a lot. I'm the type of person who, I built a platform. I mean, I started my website back in 2011. And so I built a platform, and then I was like, okay, what do you guys want to buy, basically?
Yeah.
And I just got on the phone. I mean, 2011, I got on the phone with 137 trainers
Yeah.
for 13 minutes at a time. And I've done that multiple times, that type of thing. And that's how we figured out what products or services we want to buy. And then as we started to serve tens of thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of customers, you start to really figure it out at
Yeah.
that point. But it's interesting because it started, I feel like the way that people do it now is like, I have a product, like I have this,
Mhm.
I have these cheeses, I have these crackers, like,
Yeah.
oh, I got to start a crackers blog. It's like, well, actually, I wonder if a better idea is to start a blog for snacking enthusiasts,
Right.
or like somebody who I've connected with, I've chatted with a fair bit recently, runs this thing, Epic Gardening, massive platform
Mhm.
about gardening at home. And he's
Right.
just like, every product under the sun now that as people want,
Mhm.
he can test it out for them and build it. But I wonder, there's so many different models.
Of course.
And what I think about now a lot is, you've got a daughter and son, I think. I've
Mhm.
got 2 sons. And just what do I want to be doing? Like, obviously there's lots of opportunity. There sounds like there's tremendous opportunities for you, but what do I want to be doing on any given day? And how can I kind of put that together? And that means that, hey, this is a good opportunity, for somebody else.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I do
Um,
that all the time. There's stuff that especially with books, there's books that come my way, and I'm like, do I want to
mm,
spend 9 months on this? I've got my, your family obligations,
Yeah.
coaching, your kids, your school. You want to be around for stuff. You have your family trips and all the cool stuff you want to do. Do I want to travel every few weekends to get to this person? And
Yeah.
you turn down stuff all the time. I think there's a few that you turn down that you just, man, if you were 25 and
Oh
single, and
God.
how do you say no to this?
Yep.
And there's other ones that when you're in your 40s and it's like, I can't just ditch 3 weeks of coaching and tournaments and my kids will be gone. If more of this goes on, what my
Yeah.
wife has to do. And like, so you say no to stuff, but most of them, I think your gut tells you right away that it's good or bad. I mean, as long as if you're fortunate enough to be in a position where it's not a need, like I need this
Yeah.
project to pay for X, your gut will tell you pretty quickly if it's something you should do or not.
You should do it or not. There's a motto. Do you know Michael Easter?
I don't.
You come across his books. His most recent one is Scarcity Brain.
I
He
think
wrote
I've
a book
heard
called
that,
Comfort
actually.
Crisis beforehand.
Uh-huh.
Scarcity Brain, yeah, I mean it hit the list when it came out. But Comfort Crisis was his first one.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is. So he was introduced to me through all the Men's Health folks. We had, Adam Campbell was editor in chief there for a while.
Oh,
You know
yeah,
him.
he was there a long time.
So Adam worked for us after he left there. He came and worked with us for a while. Introduced me to Mike and basically said, he's just like, I think Mike is one of, if not the best fitness journalists in the world. And I was like, oh, I should get to know this guy. And I've started to read his work, and I agree. I think Mike is one of, if not the best fitness journalists in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what he's been doing, him and I have a lot of conversations about this. In between, he's building a newsletter. I think it's on Substack, but he's got a paid version of it. And he's got a couple core sponsors that are really aligned with his brand. He talks a lot about rucking, and so Go Ruck is like one of his key sponsors. And what he kind of figured out, he's like, I'm writing these books. I'm always going to be writing these books. And there's so much material because he is very much a experiential journalist. He goes and so he's like, there's so many stories. There's so much material that doesn't make it into the book.
Mm-hmm.
And that then becomes
same. I get that totally.
his newsletter, his paid newsletter. And it seems, I mean, his output is crazy, but it seems to be working really well for him. So I just mentioned that as, if you're interested in the Books and Biceps like monetization model, I think what he's doing is pretty neat.
That's exactly the mindset that I have. Is I have so much material and stuff to write about that there's. I think the way to do it is like the Friday, the big Books and Biceps on Friday is always free. That's just kind of what it goes through,
Sure.
And then there's another version maybe that comes out on Tuesday with monthly workout things that we'd like extra. Not just extra stuff, but like unique new things that people would want to do. And I haven't crafted it so much yet because I've been so deep in macho, but like you said, having the access to the newsletter is you can start asking like, all right, here's what I'm going to do. Would you be interested in A, B, C, or D? You can get instant feedback like, I hate this, or don't do this, or we would love. And I'm sure you get it too with your scale. Like almost every newsletter I send out, I get dozens. So you probably get way more of like responses. Like, this is great. I want more about this. And it's very hard individually to answer those. I mean, I do it because it's what I do, but it's much rather be, okay, I get that if I say last year I did my first triathlon, like I realized that there's a lot of people who in the newsletter would have probably paid to get the workout that I had put together through all of my years of writing, who also wanted to do their first one and would want to, if we did a challenge for 2 months, like, okay, here, we're going to start in April and in June 1st, we're doing our first. People really dug that. And I did it with benching 300 again and a bunch of other. I did that last summer. I had a quest to bench 300, and the number of people who wrote me who started benching and hadn't benched since high school football or in their 20s, stopped lifting, who all of a sudden were like, dude, I got on the bench press for the first time in 20 years because you started saying like you wanted to bench 300 again, like you did. My whole thing was to bench 300 at 45, like I did at 25, and it was awesome. And like these journeys that people they get attached to what you're doing, and it's not like, oh, I should monetize it because I can make money there. But that's basically what you should do because it's extra stuff and you want to write about it,
Well, I mean, yes, you're right. You're not doing it to monetize it, but you're kind of thinking about it at the same time. Like, hey.
Well, yeah.
Like
that's the way I think. That's the kind of stuff that I think I would get excited about. And I would never feel like it's not worth it. I mean, people pay for anything. People pay for a certain amount a month to get someone's installments of a novel or Patreon or whatever. So it's just, here's an offer. And you kind of tweak it over time to see who might be interested in it.
And it's an in-between thing. Yeah,
it's every week while I'm doing all the other stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you don't need to be super, super stressed about it.
Yeah, the community management seems like a big undertaking. From a couple people who have reached out about it, that seems more like a 30 or 20, 30 hour commitment of like
Yeah,
managing some kind of Discord community about. I don't think that, and that's not my style either. I don't want to live on the computer all day. I know you don't. I like dipping in and out when I can.
definitely not. Well, I'm gonna recommend every single person listening to this go subscribe to your newsletter. It's
Well, thank you.
booksandbiceps.beehive.com. Is that the best
It's
place to
just
get
book,
it?
yeah, or just if you go to johnfinkel.com, the big thing up top, the first
Okay,
thing is the sign up for the newsletter,
cool.
and the thing that I'm doing a lot more of now, which I think you'll like, as if you've been reading recently, is author Q and A's.
Love
I've
it.
been lucky enough to meet a lot of my peers who write books, in you now too. I do a lot of these, and then people reach out and say, "Hey, I'm coming out with this," and I like doing behind the books Q and A's about the writing, and not so much like dorky writing, but like the stuff that I know goes into it, naming chapters and like these interviews and how did you meet this person, not just like the
I love
basic
it.
author interviews. And so
I'm
I've
so
got five or
fascinated
six.
by that stuff.
I
I'm
am too,
so fascinated by that stuff.
and the readers who I have they're readers. They want to know who, and I can track like you can, who buys what books and what people are interested in.
Mm,
So I'll reach out to an author and be like, hey, we kind of know each other, however, but I'd recommended your book a month ago and like 97 people, I don't know, bought it, but at least clicked on the link to buy it. Like they're interested. Let's do a Q&A.
right.
And, most of the people I've mentioned, I've done a Q&A with. And that's just the coolest thing. And I think that's where like the enjoyment of reading can be kind of shared with people.
I love that, man. So, you know, you can just Google books and biceps, you'll find it. But
Yeah.
this is one of my favorite newsletters, and like I said,
Thank you.
John, it's a pleasure to finally connect and talk, dude. Because
Yeah, absolutely.
it's very rare that I come across somebody and I'm just like, I this seems very uniquely to be for me, and I wanted to investigate that, and I'm glad that that you didn't disappoint, dude. Really,
No, this
really a
was great.
pleasure. Hope that we can do this again sometime, man.
Anytime, man. This was a lot of fun.
Talk soon. Bye bye.
You got it.